Please, can you give us some numbers about the museum? I don't know how many visitors are expected and what's your best attraction. Just an introduction, please.
Yeah, I mean, ever since we opened, which was on February 14th, we've been averaging about 1,000 visitors each day.
Okay.
And that's about what we expected and what we hoped for.
Okay, and what's your best attraction? What does visitor expect to see there? What's the impact for a visitor?
Well, I think, for a lot of visitors, for a lot of at least tourists, they all live in cities where the mob at one time had a presence. So, because we're the National Museum of Organized Crime and Law Enforcement, they come here looking to see what went on in the city that they came from, or trying to find people that they have a connection with, whether they had family members or relatives that were in the mob, or just knew people that were in the mob. So, for those people, it's just a matter of trying to link how the mob was connected to their city. Mm-hmm. For the local people, I mean, Vegas obviously was a city big with the mob, and the mob pretty much at one time ran this town. So, I think for locals, it's a way for them to sort of learn a little bit about the history of where they currently live and how things were run when the mob had its presence in Las Vegas.
Okay, and what about foreign visitors, like tourists? Do you think that your museum help tourism, or do you attract tourists too?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think, since we opened, it's been a healthy mix of tourists and visitors. And I think for tourists, they live in cities that, really had a mob presence at one time. Yeah. So it's a way for them to come and check out how their city sort of connects, in the greater piece of the puzzle. And get some information and certainly learn something while they're here. Again, this is the National Museum of Organized Crime, so it's not just Vegas-centric. It really touches on many other cities across the U.S. that, had a connection to the mob.
Okay, do you have something about a mob in the rest of the world? For example, we live in Italy and we have a serious problem with that. Any connection with Italy?
Well, obviously, you can't deny that the mafia and the secret society that, originated in Sicily and was brought over to the U.S. during immigration. We certainly talk about that in the museum, and certainly there's a lot of Italian names that float around this museum. And also we do touch on the fact that, back in the late 1800s, when the police chief in New Orleans was killed, that, the 19 men that went to jury on that, 11 of them were lynched as a result because they were all acquitted, and that's when the word mafia really started to come out. So we do talk about that and, the presence that, Italy, and the role that Italy played, and the mafia coming to America.
Yeah, and do you reinforce the connection between mafia, Italy, and the U.S., or it's...
Well, absolutely, and I don't think you can deny it. I mean, certainly you have, three big... areas, the Russians, the Jews, and the Italians, kind of responsible in some ways for the mob presence in America. But certainly then, America had its own spin-off of different crime families and whatnot. So, I don't think you can tell the story of the mafia and the mob without referring to, Russian immigrants, Jewish immigrants, and Italian immigrants.
Yeah, definitely. And what about, we learned that this is not the first mob museum in Las Vegas. We learned that there was another one that opened and closed at the Tropicana, and another one in New York, if I'm not wrong. Why do you think that people are so interested in this? And another question, we don't have it in Italy. Do you think it could work in Italy, a mob museum?
Well, let me go back and answer all the questions kind of in order. As far as the other, the other place that exists in Las Vegas is the mob attraction that is not a museum. Mm-hmm. So they're more of like a tourist attraction, sort of like a themed a visit, if you will. So, we're separate from those guys, so we kind of hold our own. Moving on to what you said about, could this work in Italy? I think so. It all depends. I mean, if you look at Japan and the Yakuza, and they're still being prevalent there, this could not work in Japan because a lot of people are saying that, the mob is still well and present there, and you could never do it. Could it work in Italy? Well, sure. I mean, I think that, Italians right now are probably a little bit farther removed from the mob because it spread from, that country over to the U.S. and perhaps went away a little bit. Now, I don't know. I've only been to Italy once, but, I don't know how much of a presence the mafia still holds there. But, yeah, I think something like this could work. But, again, it's really just telling a portion of history and a big piece of history that was really prevalent at one time, in America. And I think, if you're going to tell history of America like you do with, different wars or the Holocaust or other things that, go on in America, I don't think you can deny the presence of the mob and tell that piece of history, too, because it was so important for a couple of reasons, the main including that, law enforcement really had to step up its game and take down the mob, and as a result, the law enforcement gathered new techniques and new ways of fighting crime as a result of dealing with the mob.
Yeah. Do you have anything about the Italian mafia or current mobster that we still have and they are still alive? For example, RIINA and Bernardo Provenzano or Tommaso Buscetta, they are very famous in Italy. Do you know them there or not?
Well, I think we cover, I'd say we do more than scratch the surface when it comes to talking about the mob, but certainly there are so many that, we had to pick some of the most important people and tell stories about them. So some of the people that you talked about may exist in the museum in certain areas or in certain interactives. But to say that we don't, dedicate an entire exhibit just to specific, the people that you were talking about, I don't think we do that, but there are other people, for example, Bugsy Siegel, Meyer Lansky, Louis Lepke Buchalter. Those certain people do have their own exhibits because they were more prominent in America. So it's focused on American history with the mob, but certainly we can't talk about the mob without talking about the mafia.
Yeah, that's right. So according to your experience, as we faced the same problems in our country, do you think that we should open a mob museum here? Any idea?
Well, I don't want to speak for
or a suggestion.
Italy and what they would do. But, I think, again, it's just an important piece of history to tell because it was so prevalent, because people were so interested in it, and because it affected a lot of cities. If this had just been one small group of people that really didn't make a dent in society, then I would say, you have to question whether it's really worth pursuing that type of venture. But because the mob really touched a lot of different cities and really had a foothold in America, I think it's a history that's worth telling.
Yeah, that's right. And what about the victims? Do you have any section in memory of them, or it's just about the gangster and the law enforcement?
Well, we keep it pretty much, tied to the gangsters themselves. They were pretty good about, in a kind of a facetious way, about killing themselves. So, we do have one section of the Mob Museum on the second floor that spells out the mob's greatest hits with pictures of the actual mobsters shot and killed. There were police photos. So, if you're looking, if them, in a sense, are victims, then sure, that's, we do portray that. Mm-hmm. But other innocent people, unless it was somebody of notoriety or fame, again, it's hard to kind of pick out those smaller stories and make them part of the bigger story.
Yeah, you're right. And did you get any help from the Italian law enforcement to collect the information for your exhibition, or you just got help from American institutions?
Well, our curator, Kathy Berry, she really scoured the country and did her homework on trying to put together a really full circle sort of plan of, time of events, what happened with the mafia. And certainly we did go around and ask many different people about, trying to at least vet information and make sure that it was true. So, I don't know that we necessarily went to Italy or asked anybody from Italian government or anybody else, historians in Italy, that would have, knowledge of that. But certainly all the information that we have in this museum is vetted and accurate.
Okay, and here in Italy, just to make a comparison, we have important Italian judges who were killed. Basically, they were fighting against mob and they were killed. Their names are Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. You don't have anything about that in your museum, is that right? Or you don't mention foreign law enforcement?
Yeah, although we do talk about, probably the farthest back we go is we talk about, immigration and how the mob was certainly formed here in America. But, for this museum, it's more of a national museum of organized crime and law enforcement. So, although we do talk about, Russians, Italians, and Jews, it's not to the extent where, we're taking a look at how they operated in other countries. It's more just focused on America.
Yeah, okay, I understand that. Just another question related to Italian people, because there are so many Italian tourists who come to Las Vegas to see the city, and they could be potential visitor to your museum. Have you thought about that, or do you have any strategy to attract them to visit your museum? Considering also the link between, mob and Italy.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, the fact that we're a mob museum is attractive in and of itself, because certainly, when you look at the mob history, there were 3 places where the mob really came from, the biggest probably being Italy. So, I also think for a lot of Italians, if you look at Sicily, if you look at a lot of the names in Sicily, cities or towns, or, a lot of those names ended up being the mob names. So I think a lot of people, come here looking to see if they can find somebody related to their family or somebody that was in their family that might have been the mob. I'll use my example. I'm Sicilian, so my last name is Doria. Well, the Andrea Doria was the ship that sank. There was no doubt in my mind that I was probably related in some way to the Dorias, but I don't know. Yeah. But again, it's just enough of a fascination of mine to want to learn more about it. So I think other people, take that same idea when they're coming to the mob museum and sort of trying to piece together information. And even if it's not, if it turns out they weren't related, it's still fascinating enough or exciting enough to them where they want to, learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah. And so do you think that this stereotype of Italians as mafiosi is still true? What about our international image? What do you think?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
The stereotype of Italians as mafiosi, do you think it's still true? Or what do you think about our international image?
I think we've done a good job at not to perpetuate a specific stereotype. And so what we've done here is we've basically taken accurate information that is public knowledge and out there and is substantiated and built that into a museum. We're not playing into a stereotype. Stereotypes often are things that are not necessarily true, but they're just given a stereotype because they're perceived to be true. Here we know that the mafia, we know that it came from Sicily, we know that it's present in America, so that's not a stereotype, And again, the mob and the mafia were not just relegated to Italians. You had Russians, you had Jews, you had Poles. You had a lot of different ethnicities that were built into the mob, throughout history in America.
Yep. Look, fair enough. I think that we are all right for now.